Morning. I now convene, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the 2015 Congressional Steel Caucus State of Steel hearing. The United States was literally and figuratively built by the American steel industry. It's an important industry that helped to build the cars we drive, the bridges we traverse, and the skyscrapers we all marvel at. Simply put, the steel industry, perhaps more than any other, has provided America with the means to grow and prosper over generations. However, despite having the world's highest quality product and most talented workforce, the domestic steel sector is not faring well. Part of the problem is that some of our global trading partners seek to thwart the spirit and letter of international trade laws. As well, illegal dumping and currency manipulation yield tremendous harm to the American steel industry while giving foreign competitors an unfair leg up. For example, this year alone, China is on pace to produce as much steel as the rest of the world combined, despite steel usage in China only being up 1% in 2014. In southwestern Pennsylvania, the National Tube Works plant in McKeesport was shut down in June of last year in large part due to illegal dumping, which flooded the market with cheaper, inferior tubular products. Over 200 workers are now out of work. This is a story that is all too familiar to families living in steel towns like Gary, Indiana, Lorain, Ohio, and Keewatin, Minnesota. What's needed to reverse the trend of steel industry layoffs and plant closures is to ensure that the trade laws that have been enacted by Congress are respected and strongly enforced. If this does not happen, more good-paying American jobs will be lost and communities will be left to pick up the pieces. The Congressional Steel Caucus has played an important role in combating the illegal trade practices of countries determined to break our trade laws and undermine the notion of fair trade. Over the past year, the caucus has successfully led efforts to impose countervailing duties on illegally dumped oil country tubular goods from Korea, steel rebar from Mexico and Turkey, and ensured our trade laws were enforced on imported Russian hot-rolled steel. But we cannot do it alone. The Department of Commerce must be willing to partner with Congress and vigorously enforce our trade laws to ensure domestic steel manufacturers have a fair shot to compete in the global marketplace. If the administration makes this commitment, I firmly believe the U.S. steel industry is well positioned to thrive once again. We have the world's best workforce and abundant energy resources that are critical for the steel industry. We all agree that our roads need urgent repair, but funding challenges prevent us from getting the work done on our nation's aging bridges, highways, sewer and water lines without raising taxes or adding to the debt or deficit. I authored a bipartisan solution to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure and lower energy prices without raising gas taxes or more deficit spending. My Infrastructure Jobs and Energy Independence Act, H.R. 1861, funds critical construction projects by safely expanding offshore energy exploration to generate new federal revenues and dedicating those revenues and economy and dedicating those new leasing funds and royalty payments to transportation-related construction projects. This new funding will be used to rebuild our nation's aging infrastructure, which, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers, is in need of $2.2 trillion in repairs. The Infrastructure Jobs and Energy Independence Act will have a meaningful and positive impact on our domestic steel sector. I thank our witnesses for being here today and contributing to our discussion on the state of the steel industry. In particular, I'd like to recognize the members of our panel from southwestern Pennsylvania, Mary Longi, CEO of U.S. Steel, Tom Conway, the International Vice President of the United Steelworkers, and Carl Moulton, where's Carl? There we are. Carl Moulton, Chairman of the Specialty Steel Industry of North America and a constituent of Pennsylvania's 18th Congressional District. I now recognize my friend and the Vice Chairman of the Steel Caucus, Representative Pete Visclosky of Indiana.
Chairman, thank you very much. I think the Chairman summarized the situation very clearly. I've been familiar with the caucus since its inception in 1977 and look forward to hearing from our witnesses as well as great attendance from members. Thank you very much for your effort to be here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. What we're going to do is, just to kind of lay down some ground rules, I know we'll have a lot of members coming and going, so what we'll do is we will hear from our witnesses. Sorry about the small room. The Energy Conference room was taken because I've got a hearing coming up shortly after this.
So it's your fault.
It's my fault. Unless people want to talk about opiate addiction as well, we can move right into that. But what we're going to do is hear from our speakers here, give each of them a chance to make a short opening statement, and we'll go to members. But for members, just to keep timing down, we'll just ask each person to make one question or statement as we go through. We'll now begin with Michael Rippey, President and CEO of ArcelorMittal USA. Mr. Rippey, just pull the microphone to you, turn it on, and
Chairman Murphy, Vice Chairman Veslosky, and members of the Congressional Steel Caucus. I'm Mike Rippey, Chairman of ArcelorMittal USA. Thank you for holding these hearings today. As Chairman of the American Iron and Steel Institute, I will begin by giving you a brief overview of the American steel industry in 2015. The U.S. steel industry today employs 150,000 people, and for every one steel job, the industry supports nearly 7 more jobs in our communities. In other words, the U.S. steel industry supports more than 1 million U.S. jobs, and our presence isn't limited to the industrial Midwest, where we have, of course, deep roots. We have a presence in 41 states and operate 100 production facilities. Last year, we produced more than 98 million tons of steel, valued at $75 billion. Steel continues to be the material of choice for a broad range of manufactured products, and we continue to make advances in technology for our customers. We make steel stronger for defense applications, lighter for autos, and longer lasting for bridges and buildings. Today, the global economy is presenting serious challenges for all of us. Recovery since the Great Recession has been slow and uneven. While the U.S. economic conditions have improved, Europe remains weak, and growth in China and other developing economies has slowed substantially. In times like these, we know what happens. We've been there before. We've seen it before. Last year, finished steel imports increased 36%, while U.S. producers increased shipments by only 3%. Steel imports captured 28% of the U.S. market, an historically high level. The increase came from many countries: China, Turkey, South Korea, and Russia, to name a few. Based on the first few months of this year, the outlook for 2015 is unfortunately the same. The import surge is particularly troubling, given that the U.S. producers are currently using only 69% of our production capacity, and the surge of imports has contributed to the reported loss of nearly 6,000 steel jobs in the last year. In 1998, when imports also reached a record high, prices and production dropped precipitously, resulting in a crisis that caused the bankruptcies of several major steel companies in the early 2000s. Steel mill employment dropped by more than 46,000 workers between 1998 and 2002, when the President finally imposed tariffs on steel products after the Section 201 investigation. Mr. Chairman, the current import surge is putting American steel jobs at risk today, just as it did then. Let me tell you about those jobs at ArcelorMittal USA. American steelworkers are highly skilled men and women who, like generations before them, are intensely proud of what they do. In turn, these men and women are well compensated for their efforts. In 2014, the average wages of an ArcelorMittal USA steelworker was more than $90,000. That's more than double the average for manufacturing workers in Northwest Indiana and Cleveland, where the majority of our employees live and work. With that kind of pay, you might expect that it's easy for us to fill job openings. Yet therein lies another challenge that we cannot tackle alone. The average age of our workforce is 50 years. Over the next 5 years, we expect 500 retirements per year. Who will replace these retiring workers? How do we get young people to think about manufacturing as a viable career? And how do we make sure that they have the skills that the 21st century steel jobs require? ArcelorMittal USA is committed to preparing the next generation of steelworkers. In 2007, we established Steelworker of the Future, a program to prepare individuals for high-tech, well-paying jobs in steel and manufacturing. The program combines classroom learning at a partner community college with hands-on training at an ArcelorMittal facility, where the student earns more than $20 an hour. Upon graduation, students receive an associate's degree in applied sciences and skills we hope they will apply at ArcelorMittal. So far, 93% of graduates have done just that. Of course, the first objective is to get students interested in STEM, or science, technology, engineering, and math, early on. That's where we could use your help. First, as public officials, you can promote opportunities in manufacturing. Walmart and Target get headlines when they raise wages to $9 an hour. At ArcelorMittal USA, the average steelworker earns more than $30 an hour. A Steelworker for the Future graduate can make $90,000 annually by their third year of employment. Simply talking about these opportunities will open the eyes of kids, their parents, to the futures we offer. Second, our educational system must be up to the challenge. Our community college and university partners have a difficult time recruiting students with the required math and science skills. Young people often shy away from STEM long before high school. Studies show that a majority of girls lose interest in science and math by the 5th grade, while minorities make up less than 5% of today's college engineering students. Our competitors in Europe and Asia are investing in programs to develop engineering talent and a workforce that will enable them to compete globally. We too must invest in STEM education to motivate students to choose these majors and eventually careers. Mr. Chairman, we ask for your support and the support of this caucus in maintaining a sustainable U.S. steel industry. We need your help in producing a workforce with knowledge and skills to adapt to 21st century technologies. And now, more than ever, we need strong trade laws that prevent the U.S. market from becoming the dumping ground for the world's excess steel. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Ferriola, the Chairman, President, and CEO of Nucor Corporation, if you could just make sure that mic is pulled real close to you so we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Murphy, Vice Chairman Vysotsky. On behalf of our 23,000 teammates, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to appear before you today. I'm John Ferriola, Chairman, CEO, and President of Nucor Corporation. With a production capacity of over 28 million tons, Nucor is the largest steel producer in the United States. We are also the largest recycler in North America. The American steel industry is facing a crisis, and we need your help. We are experiencing an unprecedented volume of steel imports. Finished steel imports increased 36% from 2013 to 2014, 36%. Imports captured 28% of the U.S. market last year, which is the highest level on record. Import levels are higher now than they were in the years before the Section 201 steel tariffs. Steel workers and their families normally benefit when the U.S. economy is growing. However, today, domestic steel producers are not enjoying the benefits of the improving economy. Instead, less efficient, less safe, less environmentally friendly foreign producers are capturing nearly all of the growth in steel demand. As a result, domestic steel shipments were up only 2 to 3% last year. American steel mills are running at approximately 69% of their capacities. Imports are having a negative impact on the U.S. steel industry employment and investment. We are seeing this volume of imports because certain countries and their producers continue to break the rules of international trade. The administration has been far too soft on these foreign countries and companies. Too often, the Department of Commerce and the ITC have shied away from imposing tough duties that would actually change market behavior and provide real relief for domestic steel producers and steel workers' families. For example, in a case brought by Nucor and other companies, the Department of Commerce ruled that Turkey was providing rebar producers with energy subsidies. But Commerce concluded that these subsidies were of hardly any value and applied a duty of only about 1%. How could energy subsidies have hardly any value? It's an electric arc furnace business. We spend at Nucor, we spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year on energy. Failing to impose a tough duty sent a clear message to Turkish rebar producers that they could keep sending more, and that is exactly what they did. Rebar imports from Turkey averaged 52,000 tons per month when the steel industry filed the case in 2013. In 2014, they averaged 80,000 tons per month, and in January of 2015, rebar imports from Turkey were more than 108,000 tons, double the amount They shipped in double the amount as they did before we filed the trade case. We must take much tougher action with countries that blatantly break international rules. We need real solutions that will provide effective relief and change market-distorting behavior. As Congress prepares to debate TPA, we urge you to use the debate as an opportunity to strengthen trade laws. New trade authorization must include strong trade enforcement provisions and enforceable rules against currency manipulation, such as those that are included in Congressman and Chairman Murphy's Bill H.R. 820, the Currency Reform Trade Act. There are a couple of things Congress can do to create more effective trade enforcement mechanisms. First, Congress must pass the Enforce Act, which would strengthen Customs and Border Protection's ability to hold other countries accountable for getting around trade duties. Nucor also supports legislation to address decisions by the World Trade Organization and the courts that have weakened the effectiveness of our anti-dumping and countervailing duty laws, like Senator Brown's bill, the Leveling of the Playing Field Act. These measures are a start. We are going to have to continue to think outside the box to end this rampant trade cheating. The U.S. economy is one of the few bright spots in the world. Since 2009, Nucor has invested over $6 billion in our facilities because we believe so strongly in the American economy and the American worker. We want to continue to grow and continue to invest here in America. But in order to do that, we need Congress to strengthen enforcement of our trade laws to ensure that domestic steel producers are able to realize the benefits of a growing U.S. economy. We ask that on behalf of our 23,000 teammates and their families. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're now going to go to Mario Longhi, the President and CEO of U.S. Steel Corporation. Let me speak for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Longhi. Good to see you here.
My pleasure. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Steel Caucus. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today and for your support over all the years. I am Mario Longhi, and I'm proud to serve as President and Chief Executive Officer of United States Steel Corporation, the largest integrated American headquartered manufacturer of steel. Our great country was built upon a sturdy foundation, one melted and poured by the American steel industry. From the bridges and roads to the critical infrastructure upon which our national security depends, steel remains at the core of our national being. We work hard to push the frontiers of scientific discovery by developing new materials and technologies, imagining the future to meet the known and the unanticipated requirements of our ever-evolving global community. America's national security is a product of our unrivaled military, our extraordinary economic prowess, and the strength and unique resilience of the American people. Our self-reliance is the envy of the world. We feed our people, we educate our children, and we do not outsource our future, our defense, or the building of our vital infrastructure. Mr. Chairman, it is worth remembering that in World War II, when called upon, U.S. Steel produced, among many, many things, 90% of the steel used to make over 21 million helmets. And we invented a landing mat to protect our air power wherever and whenever it was required. This body has repeatedly recognized that our people's well-being, this nation's safety, security, and prosperity depend upon indigenous capacity to respond to our essential national needs in peace times and in times of crisis. We do not build a steel plant in an emergency. We make sure that we have it so we can rely on it. As you've heard today, not since the late 90s have we witnessed the torrent of steel imports. Total and finished steel products imported into our market by probably heavily subsidized command economies from 2013 to 2014 increased between 22% up to 90%. The last time we were at these levels, nearly half of the American steel companies disappeared. Just this year, from January until now, imports have grown again, up 33%. Today, across the country, while we can claim that our economy is growing, mills are being idled, plants continue to be shut down, and American workers are being laid off. American steel companies are being irreparably harmed by what we believe to be illegal trade practices. When Congress incorporated the injury standard, it did not intend for companies or workers to suffer severe, persistent harm before they can seek relief. A 1979 colloquy between the late Senators Hines and Ribicoff made abundantly clear that it would be perverse, and I repeat it, perverse, to insist that an American company experience grievous harm before becoming entitled to the full protection of its nation's laws. Over 36 years later, that right is now a right with no meaningful remedy. While the statute allows for evaluation of relevant factors for the establishment of material injury, U.S. decision makers have focused too heavily on operating margins alone as a proxy for injury. There are clearly other indicators of injury, including suppressive effects on cash flow and production, significant reduction of net income, profound impact in reduction of employment, curtailment of critical research and development, and investment in new technologies and growth. All of these must be taken into account. The injury language we propose ensures that the trade enforcement process aligns with the original congressional intent. The application of the correct injury standard is paramount, and the time to act is now. We have a rare window of opportunity to do what is right for American manufacturers and all of our workers. This opportunity will not present itself again for probably a long time. If we do not seize it, if Congress yields its leadership to another branch of government to legislate by bureaucratic fiat, you will probably condemn the American manufacturers to irrelevance, or even worse. Trade Promotion Authority must incorporate this injury standard. If it does not, we should really reject it. Mr. Chairman, it's not enough to open new markets for American goods and services. I submit to you the greater economic and national security interests demand that the enforcement of our trade laws reflects Congress' original intent. United States Steel Corporation has never been just another commercial enterprise. We are America's steel company, for over a century serving our commercial customers, but always standing ready to react when our nation calls. Never forget, in a moment of exceptional need for the steel required to maintain its strength, America can make a local call. Mr. Chairman, you do know my phone number. Thank you.
Now, Tom Conway, International Vice President, United Steelworkers. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Murphy, Vice Chairman Buskowski, appreciate the opportunity to be here again. We were here a year ago, and at that time, our testimony said that the steel workers, the steel industry was facing pressures that are going to threaten our future. Today, we find ourselves worse than we ever might have thought. At U.S. Steel alone, I have about 5,500 steel workers under warrant notice, working reduced weeks, or laid off. It covers Illinois, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Alabama, Indiana, and Minnesota. And this keeps rippling up week after week after week. And every one of these layoffs can link itself and tie itself back to trade issues and trade problems and this surge of imports that's flooding in on us right now. And we'll file another case. And as always, you will show up and you'll do a great job, and you'll send letters and you'll testify on our behalf, and we'll go through it again and again and again. And so we need to talk about a different regime of trade laws. We need to really have a discussion about what does injury mean. Injury, for us to file a trade case and 18 months later get a resolution, and we often will, we've got creamed in the period in between. Our communities have been wiped out, our jobs have been lost, the investments that the companies have made aren't getting realized, and we sit there and say, well, we want a trade case. And it's probably good for a bunch of trade lawyers. It's not doing much for us back home. And so we sit here and we can't seem to come to terms with the overcapacity. China's in its 12th five-year plan that calls for an expansion of their steel industry. For us to continue to walk past that overcapacity is just killing us here. And we're getting hammered by South Korea, by Turkey, by Brazil, by all these other nations, and we don't seem to have a comprehensive approach. And I understand the aggressive enforcement of trade laws, but aggressively enforcing a lousy law doesn't get you much. And that's what needs to be looked at here. We need to take a look at our injury standard. What is going on? What does injury mean? The simple fact that a company made some profits doesn't mean that it wasn't injured. And we need to take a close look at how it happens and how they are able to get in, and the way that the ITC counts and the metrics on injury and what injury means. And can you look at the community, who gets standing in the injury? For years now, we've walked past currency manipulation, and every administration just sort of kicks it down the road and ignores it. And it is a real live subsidy, but we can't go after it in our trade laws. We need to incorporate currency manipulation, and we need to, if we're going to move forward on these laws, and frankly, we don't think another fast track or TPP is a good idea. But without these injury standards, it's suicide for manufacturing in America, for steel workers, for basic industry workers everywhere. And you know these cases, they're not just steel. They come out of all sectors of the economy, and they hurt and they hit everyone. So there's an opportunity here to rewrite America's steel laws, or trade laws, and to be able to make a difference so that we're not continuously being cheated on and being gamed against, and we're expected to hold the bag as American workers. So that's what our caution, our plea is to you today. This is a time to change the way we've been doing business, do it in a significantly way. I'd like to point out one last thing, because to us it's illustrative. When NAFTA was passed, the rules of origin standard at NAFTA were 62.5% in order to demonstrate that that product was made in that country. When it went to the U.S.-Australia FTA, it dropped to 55. The USS Korea FTA dropped it to 35. What's TPP going to be? Right now, if the Koreans say, here's our product that's been made here, it only has to reach a 35% standard. So the other 65 can get to Korea through China, and here comes more of the overcapacity. And now we're going to talk about TPP with a whole gaggle of other nations in it, and what will the standard be then? So this encroachment and the continual failure and weakening of our laws is killing us, and it's time to rewrite our laws. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Conway. Now we recognize Mr. Tracy Porter, the President of CMC Americas and Vice Chair of the Steel Manufacturers Association. Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Murphy, Vice Chairman Visklowski, members of the House Steel Caucus, thank you for the invitation to appear before you today, and thank you for all that you do for the steel industry. I am Tracy Porter, President of CMC Americas and Vice Chair of the Steel Manufacturers Association. Commercial Metals is a vertically integrated Fortune 500 company that recycles, manufactures, fabricates, and trades steel globally. CMC's state-of-the-art electric arc furnaces manufacture high-quality steel products at 5 locations in the U.S. and 1 in Poland. With over 4.8 million tons of steelmaking capacity, CMC is the nation's 3rd largest manufacturer of long products. I'm here today in my role as Vice Chair of the SMA, which is the primary trade association for the U.S. electric arc furnace steel producers and re-rollers. SMA's 30-member companies operate 127 steel plants across the country and account for over 75% of domestic steel production. SMA also has 116 associate members who supply goods and services to the industry. As mentioned by the chairman, the purpose of today's hearing is to address the state of the U.S. steel industry with an emphasis on what Congress can do to support its health and vitality. As my colleagues have already stated this morning, we're facing extremely challenging market conditions. Despite slowly improving domestic demand and a number of recent trade case victories, U.S. markets continue to be flooded with offshore imports from a range of nations and in virtually every product category, thereby preventing domestic companies from realizing the benefit of our nation's economic recovery. The impact on U.S. producers, their employees, and surrounding communities has been widespread. We need to get serious about enforcing trade laws and holding our trading partners accountable to the rules. Simply put, the United States cannot continue to be the market of last resort for the world's steel overcapacity problem. As Congress and the Obama administration consider important topics such as Trade Promotion Authority and the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations, I reiterate SMA's position that all future U.S. trade agreements should include strong and enforceable provisions on currency manipulation, establishment of disciplines on state-owned enterprises, maintenance of strength and effectiveness of the trade remedy laws, the promotion and effective rules of origin, and assurance that labor and environmental negotiations do not result in unfair disadvantages to the U.S. manufacturers. In addition to enforcing trade laws and taking steps to shape the future of the global trade, the U.S. should also strive to enhance our own competitiveness. Long-term, adequately funded investment in our nation's infrastructure would be a major step forward. American companies are placed at a disadvantage in increasingly global markets as they compete with foreign producers who operate in nations that fund their transportation infrastructures at much greater rates, and is true of most of our major trading partners. Infrastructure investment has the ability both to provide an immediate boost to employment levels and to make the U.S. more competitive in the decades ahead. According to a recent study by Duke University's Center on Globalization, Governance and Competitiveness, each $1 billion invested in transportation infrastructure creates 21,600 jobs. Every dollar invested in transportation infrastructure returns 3.54 in economic impact. With limited resources available, policymakers should prioritize spending on highways, roads, bridges, and other components of our infrastructure in order to maximize the return on investment. Expanding federal funding consistent with the U.S. Department of Transportation's request of $114 billion per year would result in over 2.47 million jobs, or 58% more jobs than the current investment levels, and over $400 billion in total economic impact. Multi-year investment is necessary to allow state DOTs certainty and the ability to participate in large-scale project planning. The stops and starts and threats to funding have become a way of life and must be avoided. As suppliers of high-quality, durable steel products that are made almost entirely of recycled materials, SMA's members have had an active role to play in building our nation's infrastructure. Taxpayer-funded projects should utilize domestically melted and poured steel projects in order to ensure that the full benefit of investment is realized in our own economy. As such, SMA strongly supports the application of Buy American provisions. Additionally, we urge the nation's policymakers to address other issues that weaken the competitive position of manufacturers, including regulatory overreach by the EPA and OSHA, and the lack of railroad competition. The Staggers Rail Act of 1980, which deregulated the freight rail industry, has been successful in many ways, but the landscape for the rail industry has greatly changed since its passage. A series of conditions has drastically reduced the number of Class I railroads, with 4 now accounting for 90% of the market. This has left the majority of rail shippers captive to a single Class I railroad. Today, more than 3/4 of U.S. rail stations are served by only one railroad, leaving most shippers captive to a single freight rail provider with no alternative if service or rates are unsatisfactory. Despite these major changes in the rail industry, Congress has not revisited our nation's freight rail policy since the Surface Transportation Board was created to serve as the only government entity responsible for handling commercial freight rate issues. The STB in its current form provides little recourse for shippers. SMA does not support rail re-regulation. We wish to see healthy, profitable railroads that make investments to serve our industry and that operate in a market-oriented manner. SMA does, however, support sensible improvements that would increase shipper access to competitive freight rates and service, and it would modernize the STB to make it more efficient, effective, equitable agency for shippers and carriers alike. In closing, these are extremely difficult times for our industry. SMA would like to thank our congressional leaders for your support and for your continuing attention to the issues that impact the U.S. steel industry. Additionally, we wish to express our genuine appreciation to to Congressman Murphy and Visclosky for your bipartisan leadership of the House Steel Caucus. Thank you.
Thank you. We now recognize Mr. Carl Moulton, the Chairman of the Specialty Steel Industry of North America. Pull that mic in real close to you, please. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this briefing. Very well done, Mr. Conway. I don't think in 43 years I've heard it put better or more concisely. I'm Carl Moulton, Chairman of the Specialty Steel Industry of North America. SSINA's member companies produce stainless steel, superalloys, nickel alloy materials, electrical steel, tool steel, and other high technology materials for critical applications, including defense and aerospace. First, a comment on the current state of our industry. Our markets are improving with the overall U.S. economy, yet we are very concerned about the startling growth of imports and their impact on our member companies. We continue to see much evidence of unfair trade practices such as dumping and foreign government subsidies to the specialty steel sectors. Imports are up substantially. Full year 2014 imports of stainless steel and strip are up 30% over 2013. China leads the way with an incredible increase of 115% over the prior year. Stainless bar imports are up 20%, and stainless rod is up 29%. SSINA is very concerned about the rapid expansion of state-owned enterprises in the global marketplace. U.S. policies toward SOEs need to be updated and refined. A word about the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement currently being negotiated. SSINA does not support the inclusion of Japan in this agreement. It is very difficult for our member companies to export to Japan. Furthermore, Japan has aggressively manipulated its currency to give Japanese manufacturers a competitive advantage. SSINA has recently joined with the steelworkers in a letter to U.S. Trade Representative Michael Froman, urging that Japan be dropped from the TPP negotiations unless they agree to open their market and stop manipulating their currencies. China's undervalued currency remains a serious problem. The governments of China and Japan continue to subsidize their specialty steel producers by keeping their currencies undervalued. We deeply appreciate the support for currency legislation shown by members of the Congressional Steel Caucus, and particularly the leadership which Chairman Murphy and Congressman Tim Ryan have shown with their legislation. As I have reported you previously, we in the specialty steel industry are concerned about the lack of new graduates in metallurgical science. We need qualified people to support the technological challenges of the future in our high technology business. The Congressional Steel Caucus has been helpful in seeking solutions to this issue. We are currently developing a proposal for your consideration, and we'll be in touch again shortly. SSINA is deeply concerned by DOE's consideration of a plan to release into the market scrap metal from radiological areas that it labels as uncontaminated. Unfortunately, the scrap is contaminated, and the plan would allow the release of scrap with levels of radiation that will trigger detectors at our mill. The plan threatens the integrity of the entire scrap supply and consumer confidence in steel products made from this recycled material. Despite our concerns, DOE is considering moving forward with this ill-advised plan. I want to express our appreciation to Vice Chairman Visclosky for raising this issue with DOE recently in a House Appropriations Committee hearing. SSINA remains concerned about the EPA approach to regulating greenhouse gas emissions. The pending rule addressing GHG emissions from the existing fleet of electrical utilities promises significant increases in electricity costs and potential reliability issues. The cost increases will have adverse effects throughout the economy, particularly for energy-intensive industries such as specialty steel production that already face stiff foreign competition. A strong defense industrial base starts at the top of the supply chain with the production of the specialty metals that are the building blocks of that base. High-performance specialty metals are critical to the production of virtually every major military aircraft, naval system, and weapons production program upon which U.S. national security depends. For more than 40 years, the Specialty Steel Amendment has ensured the existence of a defense material supply chain that is cost competitive, accessible, and reliable. The law has encouraged substantial investments in the specialty metals sector, enabling the United States to achieve and retain its technological leadership in the production of these materials. As an example, my company, ATI, has spent over $4 billion in new investments over the last 6 years. The Steel Caucus has repeatedly supported our efforts to ensure that the Specialty Metals Amendment is properly administered and enforced by the Defense Department. The caucus has also opposed attempts to weaken the law through regulatory changes or statutory amendments. Such changes serve no purpose but to open the floodgates to subsidized suppliers in Russia or China who wish to supply defense aerospace and other defense markets. Russia already has that capability in titanium, and China is making major inroads in the production of nickel-based alloys. The Specialty Metals Amendment is what stands between a globally competitive U.S. defense supply chain and a defense industrial base which is dependent on China and Russia. Do we wish to place the key building blocks of our defense industrial base in the hands of these two countries? I think not. Acquisition reform is a buzzword we hear regularly. We understand that Congress, and specifically the Defense Authorization Committees, have made procurement reform a priority in the defense acquisition arena. Government-backed competitors in Russia and China should not be permitted to capture the U.S. strategic defense market. As procurement reform proceeds, we ask for the continued support of this caucus for our world-class specialty metals sector as Congress evaluates the supply chains and reviews the acquisition process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moulton. And now, finally, Douglas Polk, the chairman of the Committee on Pipe and Tube Imports. Please pull your mic close to you. Thank you very much.
There you go. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Doug Polk, and I'm Vice President of Industry Affairs at Valorec USA, located in Houston, Texas. Valorec is one of the world's leading producers of steel tube products used by the energy industry. Our company and our employees are proud to be part of this nation's energy renaissance, and we are prepared to meet the energy needs of future generations. Our primary manufacturing facilities are located in Youngstown, Ohio, Muskogee, Oklahoma, and Houston, Texas. We have other production facilities in Louisiana and Wyoming. Some caucus members may recall that we announced a multi-million-dollar investment in a new fine-quality seamless tube mill in Youngstown, Ohio. That investment grew to approximately $1 billion. Our Youngstown plant has employed over 1,200 workers. First and foremost, this facility would have not become a reality if our company and other U.S. oil country tubular good producers had not received relief from unfairly traded imports from China in 2010. These anti-dumping and countervailing duty orders made it possible for our company to take the risk associated with building the nation's newest OCTG mill. We also extend our gratitude to each member of Congress who supported us during the investigation to ensure that we received relief. Our first years were met with great success, but that chapter has closed. As we have heard from other witnesses this morning, there is a crisis facing the U.S. steel industry. The U.S. has been the destination for vast volumes of energy tubular imports, all arriving at a time when we are experiencing a decline in demand. The result is something we all know too well: declining prices, heavily subsidized and unfairly priced imports taking a larger market share of a rapidly declining market. You will note in one of the slides, that's included as part of the package, the dramatic increase in inventories as rigs are laid down. This exacerbates what was already a stressed market. Employee layoffs and plant idlings are unavoidable as we move through 2015 and 2016. As of today, there are over 6,000 workers on layoff in the pipe and tube sector, and we hear more every day. This morning I appear here on behalf of the members of the Committee on Pipe and Tube Imports. Our association has 46 members who have facilities in 30 states and employ over 35,000 workers nationwide. Our member companies make an array of products used in automotive applications, residential and commercial construction, energy, transportation and infrastructure, and fire protection. As a downstream steel sector, these companies are important customers of the nation's basic steel producers, many of them represented here. And industry represents nearly 1/3 of the sales of domestic hot rolled products. I'd like to highlight a few of the issues that we as an industry and association believe warrant attention and action. First, 2014 and first quarter 2015 data confirm that imports have continued to grow and gain a greater share of the U.S. market. Second, despite the endless attempts over the years of diplomatic exchanges between the U.S. and China, there has been no end to subsidized steel expansion in China. Today, China continues to expand its steel overcapacity. Third, while we are encouraged by the new shale discoveries and achievements in new technologies that result in an increased demand for steel tubular products, we are disappointed that much of this demand has been served by imports. Let me begin by elaborating on imports and why our industry remains gravely concerned. In 2014, pipe and tube products took over half of the U.S. market. In fact, import penetration for all steel pipe and tube products was 58.2%, almost 60%. Much of these imports arrive from China and Korea, with India and Turkey following. The industry filed trade cases against OECD imports from 9 countries, including Korea, on July 2, 2013. After a long and lengthy battle, the industry received relief from 6 countries in September 2014. The good news is that we were able to keep 10,000 workers employed. However, the tale continues as Korea has taken the U.S. to the World Trade Organization to challenge these final results. Of course, the story did not end with OCTG. After huge increases in imports of welded line pipe from Korea and Turkey, the U.S. industry filed cases in October of 2014. Line pipe, another segment of the energy industry, is used as a primary product to transport oil and gas infrastructure development. In January and February of 2015, imports of OCTG and line pipe surged by more than 50%, even though the market was declining due to falling energy prices and the drop in the rig count. Second, allow me to expand on the chronic issue of subsidized global overcapacity. CPTI members have been vocal on this issue for over a decade. Despite our efforts, there has been no meaningful progress on this issue. It is why they recognize that the Chinese government has subsidized over 1 billion tons of steel capacity in China. Of course, of this, there are over 250 million metric tons of excess capacity. China is the world's largest steel exporter by far, with nearly 100 million metric tons of steel exports in 2014 at prices more than 1/4 below world prices. So year after year, we ask the same question: how can we end this harmful cycle? CPTI believes the only solution is to insist that the U.S. government enlist other governments around the world to take Chinese violations of the subsidy rules to the WTO for redress. If we do not take swift and appropriate actions, I fear we will continue to see the demise of the domestic industry. It is time that our government take action to hold China accountable to the terms of their WTO accession by pursuing violations by China of the subsidies and countervailing measure agreement. Third, the CPTI believes that members should take appropriate action to address a number of legislative proposals in Congress. CPTI urges Congress to take appropriate action on the Currency Reform for Fair Trade Act, H.R. 820, was introduced in February of 2015. It includes provisions that would allow currency manipulation to be recognized as subsidy. CPTI urges Congress in its review of trade legislation to adopt provisions that will end customs fraud by supporting legislation that will provide the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Service with the authority and direction to carry out these enforcement responsibilities. CPTI urges Congress to support legislation that will expedite the permitting and approval of pipeline construction to allow the industry to be part of the safe and efficient solution to transport crude across the country. CPTI applauds members who are working with constituents on ready-to-work programs and worker reentry programs, including veterans training programs for the next generation of workers in the industry. Finally, on behalf of members of the CPTI, we thank you and your colleagues in the caucus for your support of the industry, its workers, and the communities that we call home. We remain committed to ensuring that this competitive, innovative, and critical industry is here now and in the future for generations to come. CPTI will continue to work with you and others in Congress on policies that will promote a strong manufacturing sector and vibrant, innovative, and robust steel industry. Thank you.
I thank all the panelists for your testimony today. Sobering and alarming, but something Congress has to deal with. What we're going to do here is we're going to have each person basically ask one question or comment. Try and keep it short because I want to make sure everybody has a chance to speak here. And we'll introduce the members as we go through here. I have a lot I want to ask, and Mr. Polk, I want to follow up with you at some other point about the pipe industry because I know in Pennsylvania our natural gas industry is booming. We know they're buying a lot of foreign pipe, and they're telling us that the steel industry is not working with them and they can't make the right spec pipe. I don't believe that for 1 second, but we'll talk more. Mr. Long, I have a question for you. Can you give us some examples of how this industry standard now handicaps the steel industry in these dumping cases? And you'll need to pull that mic close to you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, let me attempt to illustrate the weaknesses and narrowness of the standard today by revisiting a very recent case, which I believe you're very familiar with, was the OCTG case that we filed and won last year. Between 2010 and 2012, our energy and tubular businesses were operating with a small margin. And the law, the standard, basically calls very heavily on margins as a reference for injury. And between 2010 and 2012, we had 9 countries invading the United States with their products at a rate that grew 115% over the period of 2 years. And because the standard is so narrowly focused on margins, it took a long time for us to create a proper reference to file a case. And during that period of time, you saw the destruction that it caused. There is another important feature that needs to be understood. The foreigners know the limits that we have by the type of the standard that we have. And their strategy is a strategy that expands decades when they attack this market. They know how long it takes, how difficult it is to prove. That is why in my testimony I mentioned that the definition of injury has to incorporate all of the proper dimensions of what injury is. During a period of 10 years, the foreigners invest in the latest technology. They know that they can cripple our industry, inhibits our ability to invest in new technologies, forces us to deal with the painful situation of laying off works, curtailing production, and everything that comes associated with it. During this period of time, they are enhancing their capabilities. And here we go again today, as we mentioned, we find ourselves in seeing the 12 major categories of steel products having imports growing between 25 and 90%. And here we sit again to talk about the situation. There is an urgency that we change that standard, and that's why we provided language that I believe we can work with, and it's totally WTO compliant. And there is a part of it that deals with the ability to execute. Why do we have to wait 3 years? Why can't we use the technologies available to update what the risks are on every spec that lands on our shores? And why wouldn't we stop them from unloading the cargo before they can prove that everything's correct? Why do we have to wait 3 years on such a narrow definition of harm?
Thank you. Mr. Viskowski, recognized now.
I'll defer for now, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and Mr. Harper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to each of you for being here. This is a very, very important issue, one that we're greatly concerned about, and certainly we were very proud of Nucor Steel, which has a great presence, Mr. Ferriola, and in Flowood, Mississippi, in my congressional district. The best workers, best product anywhere, and I'll just tell you thank you for what you mean to our state. You mentioned in your testimony the case brought by Nucor and other companies involving rebar producers with energy subsidies. Why is the remedy for rebar not as vigorous as it should be? And tell me what we need to do.
Well, first of all, thank you for your comments about our teammates in Mississippi, Jackson particularly. And I will point out that right now those great workers and their families are suffering about a 30 to 40% reduction in their salaries because of this exact case that you brought up. Despite a ruling in the ITC of 6-0, 6-0, recognizing that Turkey was violating our laws, breaking our laws, they got a positive ruling, but the Department of Commerce failed to recognize all of the subsidies, even though we carefully pointed them out. They determined that the energy subsidy was immaterial, small, negligible. And as I mentioned in my testimony, for us, it represents hundreds of millions of dollars. We would be very happy as a company at Nucor to stop complaining about this issue if the United States government is willing to pay our energy bills for the next 3 or 4 years. I don't think they're going to agree to do that, so we'll continue to complain. A ruling of 6-0, then Commerce comes back and applies a 1% penalty, clearly sending a message that the penalty will be small regardless of how many times you repeatedly violate, break our laws. It only encourages one action, and they keep taking it. They are profiting wildly, bringing product in. When you look at the country, they have no natural resource. They don't have scrap. Their energy costs are higher than ours. They have to pay the freight costs to bring the product, the raw materials into their country, back, the finished product back to the United States, and yet they sell under our market by $100 a ton and claim that they are profitable and not being subsidized. Common sense, just plain common sense, demands that something isn't right. And I'm going to support my colleague from U.S. Steel here in saying the laws have to be changed so that there's a level of common sense to them. And when we see countries and producers that are repeat offenders, we need to adjust the penalties accordingly and not suffer for 2 or 3 years and watch our teammates' families suffer for 2 to 3 years while we're waiting to take action.
Thank you, Mr. Ferriola. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. And we're going to go to Doyle, Bost, Nolan, and Wilson. So, Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been a member of the Steel Caucus for over 20 years. And coming to these meetings is sort of like watching the movie Groundhog Day. We talk about the same things every year, and nothing changes, and nothing ever gets done. We go to the ITC, and we testify, and we win some cases, and we lose some cases, and the process just continues. It's like we're being played for chumps by China and all these other countries. We can't even pass a Buy USA provision in the United States Congress. We're building pipelines in this country. The biggest one, going from Canada down to the Gulf of Mexico, that we have a lot of debate about, has no U.S. steel in that pipeline. I got to tell workers in the Mon Valley who see all this Marcellus shale gas coming out of the ground in western Pennsylvania, they think they got jobs for life making pipes, and they're being laid off because pipe from Korea is flooding the market. I've been through 3 presidents now, Democrat and Republican. Something mysterious happens to presidents when they get elected when it comes to trade issues. They all become these free traders and trying to deal with any of them. I mean, why anybody would give fast track authority to this president or any other president boggles my imagination. I certainly have no intent. There's a better chance that this Powerball ticket I have in my pocket has made me a multimillionaire before I'll vote for fast track. If we're, and I'll tell you another thing, a TPP without a currency chapter is a complete joke. I mean, if anybody votes for that and there's not a currency chapter in it, or as Mario said too, that we don't more clearly define what harm means. I mean, we might as well just shut the doors in manufacturing. Might as well just tell our country that we've just decided not to build anything in America anymore, that we're just going to let everybody else build it. Because our industries don't stand a chance the way that these rules are rigged against us. And members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, better understand that that's what's at stake here. So, you know, we've been getting lobbied hard by the administration and others to give this president fast track authority. I think it's a huge mistake. If we're going to be able to negotiate anything in the TPP, and I'm very skeptical about that, there's no way we're going to be able to do that if we give fast track authority. You know, we're just going to be handed the document and, you know, it's going to be like this, and they're going to say, okay, guys, you know, this is going to create jobs, and we're going to get screwed again, just like we do with every one of these other trade bills. So I really don't have a question, Mr. Chairman. I just, it's, you know, I just wanted to get some of this off of my chest, so I'll yield back.
I'm whipping you as a no vote on TPP.
Yeah, you can put me down.
But that is an important issue, that whole issue of the, you know, the White House is differing with us on the whole issue of currency manipulation. Before we go on to Mr. Bosser, I just want to recognize members that were here had to leave, but Mr. Kelly of Pennsylvania, Mr. Davis of Illinois, Mr. Rothfuss of Pennsylvania, Mr. Jenkins of West Virginia, Mr. Davis of, and Mr. Joyce of Ohio were here, and we thank them for coming by too. Now recognize Mr. Boston of Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, let me say that this hearing today, first off, I'm one of the newest members of the caucus, and this meeting couldn't have came at a more appropriate time for us. Yesterday, it was announced that Granite City Works, the steel plant right in my district, is, as of May, 2,000 workers will be laid off temporarily. Now, I'm still trying to figure out what temporarily is and want to work to make sure that the temporary is a very, very short time. My constituents need this plant. They need the jobs. The Metro East needs these jobs. This plant has been in place for a century with only one slowdown in all of that time. You know, these are good paying jobs. People work hard. Families are scared. Workers are frustrated. Local elected officials are frustrated. You know, one thing I know for sure, and I feel like my colleague here, okay, this isn't a question, it's a statement, and Mr. Longy, I will be working with you, and I will be working with labor to make sure we do all that we can do to make sure those jobs are back quickly or that they don't go away at all, okay? And let me tell you that Representative Davis, who just left here, Representative Shimkus, both we've been talking, working together with the governor to try to make sure that we handle the things at the local level that we can to help them. But this is a bigger problem. Even in my candidacy, I came, and if you'll remember with the case that was pending, we had a rally, and I stood there alongside with management and labor to send a clear message that our trade rules must be enforced. But the fact that they drag their feet, it's a problem. Whether it is those rules or whether it is manipulation of the currencies of foreign governments, we've got to work together to try to get this situation straightened out and make sure that these people stay at work. So with that being said, let me tell you my pledge. My pledge is to work with the members on this caucus and in this Congress, I don't care what region of the state you're from, and I don't care what party you're from. My job is to be very passionate and to work hard to make sure that the hardworking people of my district keep working, and I have all intentions of doing that. So I look forward to working with you. I know we're going to be talking over the next few days, and thank you for the opportunity. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
Just
yes,
one comment. First of all, thank you so much for the support, and we're very pleased that you are where you are, because we know we can count on you. A year and a half ago, we authorized a very massive investment in Granite City to increase its capacity. And we're now in the last third portion of that investment, which we will continue. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you what temporary means, but we believe in the future. And we really are putting in the hands of Congress the true opportunity for Congress to exert their right to right companies such as ours and all of the people that are associated with what we do. We will provide you everything you need. All that we ask is that you act, and act decisively on it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I want to thank the panel for their candor, and thank the chairman for your characterization of it, Chairman Murphy. It's both sobering and alarming. I wish all of our colleagues here in the Congress were here to have heard your testimony, but I want to assure you that the members of the Steel Caucus here will make sure they're made aware of it as we approach the consideration of this as Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. And, you know, Mr. Doyle talked about what happens to presidents, Democrat and Republican alike, when it comes to trade. I think at some level we have to ask ourselves, you know, what happens to Congress? You know, aside from the fact that, you know, what is happening is devastating to our country, our security, our economy, our jobs, our business, our industry, our future, for the Congress to accept a fast track, quite frankly, is an abdication of its responsibility. There are few things that are as clear in the Constitution as who's responsible for the trade relationship between nations. It's the Congress of the United States. So I hope that we'll all have the bipartisan courage and the good judgment and common sense to step up and make sure that this doesn't happen. Our country, our economy, our Constitution, our responsibility are all at stake in this argument. Thank you for your candor.
You know, we're going to go to Hudson and then Dent. We'll go back. Mr. Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership on this issue. And it's great to see my hometown steel company here. Appreciate Nucor and what you mean to our community. And I look forward to being a partner with you on this in my new capacity on energy and commerce. Chairman Murphy has assured me I'm on the best subcommittee in Congress, oversight and investigations. We have a hearing coming up soon, but I would caution my colleagues. I think we ought to keep our powder dry a little bit on TPA because I think we will have an opportunity with limiting language to potentially do some of the work we want to do to make sure we're sending the right signals to the president. I think we could write a TPA bill that is helpful to our industry, depending on what the language comes out. And I don't think we should give up that option. I think we ought to pursue that option. And so I would just say to my colleagues, my good friend across the aisle, let's keep our powder dry and look at TPA as an opportunity. I think it's a way we can maybe achieve some of the things we're concerned about. And if not, we can still vote no at the end of it. So I thank you for your time today, and I look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Mr. Dent.
Thank you all for being here this morning. Apologize I didn't get here a little sooner to hear all the presentations, but my father was a 30-year man at Bethlehem Steel in industrial engineering, and then later in his career in human resources, and left there in 1983. So I've been through all the challenges of the steel industry, particularly in Bethlehem. My question is to Mr. Rippey at AISI. Your company has taken over a lot of the former operating assets of what was then Bethlehem Steel in Burns Harbor, Indiana, and Steelton, Pennsylvania, and elsewhere. I'd like to just kind of hear a quick update how those former operating units are doing, first. And second, the question I had dealt with Steelton, Pennsylvania. we have one hot remnant left of the Bethlehem Steel Company in Bethlehem. That's the old Lehigh Heavy Forge, which is a good customer to the Steelton folks. And there was a time, it seemed, I never thought in my wildest dreams that we were having a hard time receiving steel in Bethlehem, having a hard time getting it. There wasn't enough capacity out in Steelton. That was a couple of years ago. How is that capacity problem now? I never thought in my wildest dreams this could happen, but it did. And so I guess I just wanted to hear a quick update from you, and I just think we ought to listen to what Mr. Hudson just said too, just to keep our powder dry on the TPA, TPP, and let's let this process play itself out before committing ourselves.
Congressman, I'd like to report that those former Bethlehem facilities, now ArcelorMittal facilities, are doing quite well. They should be. And as I think you've heard today, the reason that we're struggling has nothing to do with the commitment of the workforce or our customers and our ability to compete in a fair and open trade environment. But what's causing the challenges at those former Bethlehem facilities is the existence of, massive, unfair, foreign steel arriving at our ports every day. And, we've talked about China, we've talked about certain countries, but I think it's worth pointing out that, China has over 371 million tons of excess capacity. Throughout the globe, there's 638 million tons of excess capacity floating around looking for a home. And because of the trade laws that we have on the books today and our inability to enforce on a timely basis remedies, we continue to suffer. So you've acknowledged that in your own family you've experienced the ups and the downs of steel. And we look back at 201, significant legislation back in the early 2000s, and some people would claim it's a victory. I have a hard time reconciling myself with that being a victory. And the reason for it is because it took so long to implement 201. By the time it was implemented, Bethlehem Steel had already filed bankruptcy. 46,000 people had already lost their jobs. 31 steel companies in this country went bankrupt prior to the enactment of 201. So it's this whole idea of, when injuries occurred. To wait until steel companies have filed Chapter 11, people have lost their livelihoods, families have been deeply affected, communities have been devastated. I live in Northwest Indiana. I saw the devastation as a young person working for the Inland Steel Company. It's absolutely unconscionable to me that we have to prove injury by, seeing the landscape strewn by the loss of so many jobs and so many communities. That's an absurdity. So I have a hard time proclaiming the success of 201, and it is so retrospective. So, we're doing okay at those former Bethlehem facilities, but I'm as concerned today as I was in 1998 that the future in the presence of these surging imports is not bright for us.
Thank you. Mr. Rice, do you have any comments, questions?
Well, I'm proud to say that I have both an Arcelor and a Nucor Steel plant in my district. And I have 4 paper mills, and certainly trade policy is extremely important. I appreciate y'all being here to educate us today. I don't think we're in the right spot in trade policy in steel. I've heard dozens of what I believe are very valid complaints from my steel partners, and I'll do whatever I can to see if I can alleviate that. And maybe TPA should be, maybe that should be the primary focus. American competitiveness is my focus here in Congress. And there's a fellow named Michael Porter from Harvard who's expert in competitive theory, and I brought him here to Congress several times to talk about what we can do to make ourselves more competitive. I believe that, countries around the world, there are teams of people that get up every day, and their job is to figure out how to beat the United States economically and how they can take more jobs from America. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that it's a one-sided thing because we're not in the game. We don't even try to compete. And Dr. Porter says, and I agree with him, that historically maybe we've accepted trade agreements and trade policies that weren't necessarily in our favor because decades ago we could afford to do that. We were so far ahead of the rest of the world, but that's not true anymore. And so all I can do is promise you that I'll be vigilant and that I will pursue every way that I can to make sure that our country is competitive, our steel industry is competitive, and all of our industry is competitive in the world. So thank you very much for being here.
Thanks. Now, Mr. Visclosky, you want to make some comments or questions?
Chairman, my only complaint is Mr. Moulton complimented Mr. Conway on his testimony, and I do have to spend some considerable time with Mr. Conway, maybe life more difficult. I want to thank everybody on the panel. Obviously, I've been a member of the caucus for some period of time, and in all honesty, I think this was one of the best panels we've had. People were very focused and have, I think, drawn people's attention publicly to the crisis that the industry faces. My concern is that in the minds of some of our colleagues, and I think people in the administration and generally in the country, they still believe that the industry is represented by companies that existed in the 1970s, where a gentleman at one time, and I was still on congressional staff, explained to me, he works for a company that no longer exists, that the laws of physics have prohibited electric furnace companies from producing more than 40% of the steel in the United States of America. Those days are gone, and now you're at 2 hours per ton. But you have 600 million excess tons, and this is not a game in the sense of children playing, but cutting our throats. We won a case in 2009, the interchange with the chairman, and then everybody else fills that void because they know exactly what to do. They know exactly what their time frame is. They know what the fee is going to be, and it's a cost of doing business. And I do think, Mr. Long, you hit it on the head. Do we have to prove grievous harm? Where in the congressional district I represented, from 1977 to 87, we lost 38,000 American jobs before somebody does something here. I also appreciate that you have specific language as far as improving injury, because we can't wait. The question I was going to ask about 201, Mr. Rippey already answered, is okay, 2 years from now we'll know the answer to that question. Do you also have language that you've proposed as far as state-owned enterprises and the issue of the subsidized global overcapacity that we can utilize as well? Because I think that's a serious problem.
We can get it to you, and it's been developed, it's been a couple of packages that are floating around, but the state-owned enterprise is going to be a big deal. I mean, companies are just moving here, and that's now who they're competing with. And it just is absolutely foolish. And then on overcapacity, I think we need a section there that recognizes that when a country overbuilds by 4, 5, 6, 700%, it has nowhere else to go, and we need to view it differently. So we can get you those things.
Mr. Visclosky, Tom and I work together in creating some of these language. There is a true partnership in what we can and should do for all of our people. I call your attention to the fact that very recently the Chinese steel makers have requested of their government support so that they can expand globally. So now they've weakened us, they keep weakening us, and now they want to come and take over. I was not here 10 years ago, but I think what we're suffering right now is probably as similar to what devastated the steel industry 10 or 15 years ago. And if we don't act decisively on all of these fronts to change the language, which we'll be providing to you, we may see that happen again.
If I may make just a quick comment, a lot of discussion today about the 201 and the horrific conditions that existed before that 201 was passed and the consequences of it. Please bear in mind that import levels today as a percent of market share are greater than they were before the 201 was necessary. One more comment, if I may.
Well, the 58% on pipe is just...
I would kindly ask you if you would maybe speak with Representative Doyle. He made an opening comment.
Do that.
Okay. He made an opening comment that this is like Groundhog Day and that nothing has changed after all of these hearings. I submit that something has changed. The foreign producers and countries have become more brazen in the violating of our laws, and the amount of imports continuously grow. The percentage of market share today captured by foreign producers, okay, is at a record high. So something is changing. It is getting worse despite all of the hearings. Thank you.
And as I often say, I'm ranking on defense appropriations, as I think you know, you need a country to defend first before you have a strong military. But I think, Mike, you mentioned the production of helmets. Other people talked about our Navy. I think a couple of us here in the caucus were just at naval breakfast earlier today. And today we continue to buy heavy lift rocket engines from Russia, who invaded a European country last year because we don't make them here anymore. And I don't want to build that next carrier or that attack submarine, pick a country, steal from someplace other than the United States of America. Again, I think you did an excellent job. Mr. Chairman, thank you very, very much for organizing this.
I know they just called votes. Mr. Pittenger came in. Do you have any questions, comments, statements you want to make real quick?
Well, sorry, we had votes on financial services, and I regret being here late, but certainly I want to be apprised of any way that we can have fair and equitable trade agreements. And I appreciate the time that you've come to be here, and I know I'll get the notes from all this briefing, and we'll assess this, and certainly want to be responsive.
Thank you. I really want to thank this panel. Though we do have to run off and vote, the information you bring before us is extremely valuable. It is important to continue to have a face of steel. These are real people, these are real jobs. The consequences are dire. They're looming, they're growing, and we have to do something about that. Among the things on our plate now where we can take some action is the motivation to work on a trade agreement with the Pacific. So we have those issues about China and other countries using that as a mechanism to slip their steel through other countries. That is something we're very concerned about. To have currency manipulation as part of this discussion. We see the White House saying they don't want to do it, but it's a pretty bipartisan group pushing back and say you need to do this. One way or another, these issues have got to be there. So I agree with some of the comments made, like with Mr. Hudson and Mr. Dent. The fact that it's before us is a vehicle by which we know it's going to move and one we can push. I hope that while you're here in town and when you go back in town as well, you're talking to your members of the House and members of the Senate about this. I find it takes a lot of education to help people understand what free trade is and what fair trade is. And as we have a lot of new members of the House and Senate, it's important to continue to educate them and help them know this. We are here to stand up for steel. We'll continue to do this. This Steel Caucus is a strong body. By the way, if you know some members in your districts who are not members of the Steel Caucus yet, please have them sign up, because we want to make sure that as this trade agreement is going through, they know that the many members of the Steel Caucus are going to push hard to help you so that your workers, your companies, and the future of America's manufacturing remains strong. Thank you very much, and with that, we conclude this hearing.